It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. A major security breach at Westminster as negotiators continue to try to persuade a protester to come down from the clock tower, which houses Big Ben. At least 20 people are killed in Russian missile strikes in what the UN says is one of the deadliest days for civilians in Ukraine this year. Nigel Farage calls for his fellow Reform members to behave as party infighting continues to play out in public. The Delhi garbage mountain, where nearby residents are being slowly poisoned. Plus, Liverpool are now 16 points clear at the top of the Premier League after a scare at home to Southampton today. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. A standoff between the police and a protester who has scaled Parliament's Elizabeth Tower continues this evening. Negotiators are trying to persuade the man, who is carrying a Palestinian flag, to end his protest after he climbed the clock tower early this morning. He's been sharing videos on Instagram from his viewpoint on the tower, saying he will only come down on his own terms. Our correspondent Ashna Haranag reports.
A dangerous stunt captured on camera. With one goal, no matter the risk.
Got to get out to that point now.
A protester scales one of London's most famous landmarks with frightening ease just before 7:30 on Saturday morning.
So I'm currently on the side of Big Ben.
And proceeds to sit a third of the way up the Elizabeth Tower for hours. Barefoot and with no safety harness, he unfurled a Palestinian flag. Those on the ground looked on in horror, and some with fascination.
At first I thought it was an exercise for the emergency services, but because I hadn't seen the man yet, and then when we saw the man, we thought, well, this is for real.
It's crazy that he managed to get up there, you know, the police presence around.
It's just unbelievable because, I mean, normally the security is incredible in this whole area.
If someone can literally get over a wall like that and get up a building that quick with no one stopping them, unbelievable really, isn't it?
How this happened is the key question.
This isn't the first time there's been a security breach like this at one of the most secure buildings in the entire country. The estate is looked after the Metropolitan Police's Parliamentary and Diplomatic Unit, who also look after embassies and Downing Street.
Getting into the estate requires airport-style security. Frightening, then, that this began with a hop over a fence.
It's not just about the importance of the sanctity of the parliamentary space in our national democratic life. It's actually about public safety. So none of this should happen. And whatever security there is, even at 7:30 on a Saturday morning, it's clearly not enough.
With Westminster Bridge shut and crowds dispersed, negotiators are now suspended metres in the air on a crane, pleading for him to come down. We're told Parliament takes security extremely seriously, but this may have been a blind spot. Ashna Haranag, Sky News in Westminster.
Let's bring in our correspondent Amelia Harper, who's in Westminster for us this evening. Amelia, in the last few moments, we've seen that cherry picker with the negotiators speaking to him move away from the scene.
Yeah, that's right. There had been perhaps some indication that he may be ready to come down. The platform on that cherry picker had come out, but it has now gone back in and that cherry picker has now lowered. So it seems that this is a situation that really could continue into the night, and he's given no indication that he is ready to come down, having been there since 7:30 this morning. And we know that he's been taking videos of the progress that he has made up the side of this tower. He has been resting his head through the afternoon periodically on the stone in front of him, the one that he has straddled, that he has tied. this pro-Palestine flag too, and he has been eating small snacks through the afternoon that he's brought with him, indicating that there has been a certain amount of preparation involved in what has happened here. In terms of those two cherry pickers, there had been negotiators up there trying to coax him, to convince him to come down. They had said that you are not safe. He had said, well, yes, I am. His feet were bleeding, though, so he has sustained some small injuries at the very least, making his way up the tower. Where we are here in the middle of the road leading onto Westminster Bridge is still closed as part of this large emergency service response at the moment, and there is an ambulance actually within the gates of the parliamentary estate as part of this holistic approach to try to make sure that should anything happen that they are prepared. But questions now, tonight and tomorrow, will turn to, well, how did this happen, and questions about security. This is not the first time that someone has managed to undertake an act such as this. In 2019, a protester managed to scale the scaffolding that was outside Big Ben, and back in 2008 a number of protesters managed to make it onto the roof on top of Parliament. So questions now as to what happens next. Speaking to police here on the ground, they said they're in a frankly difficult position. It's too risky for them and negotiators to try to physically manhandle him down. But equally, they have said it is going to be endangering his life as well if they also try to do that. So it's very much been up to him as to when he wants to come down. Tonight, it doesn't seem that he wants to.
OK, Amelia, for the moment, thank you. We'll, of course, keep across the situation throughout the course of the evening. Despite President Trump warning Russia to stop pounding Ukraine, there's been another night of deadly missile attacks, killing 20 people. UN monitors say it's one of the deadliest days for civilians in Ukraine so far this year. At least 11 people have been killed in a Russian drone strike on the town of Dobropilya, northwest of the Russian-occupied Donetsk region. There were further overnight attacks on the town of Bogodukhiv in Kharkiv, where 3 men were killed and 7 injured. And in the southern city of Odessa, where Russian drones targeted the facilities of Ukraine's biggest energy company. Ukraine targeted Russian infrastructure in turn, hitting a tank at the Kinev oil refinery near St. Petersburg. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops in Russia's Kursk region are reportedly nearly surrounded by Russian forces as part of a counter-offensive. Kursk was the site of a successful Ukrainian incursion into Russian territory last year. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, sent this report from eastern Ukraine.
A voice shouts, "Lie down," as Russia bombards a town in eastern Ukraine. Residential blocks ablaze in a blitz of death. The strikes on Dobropilya came only hours after Donald Trump warned Vladimir Putin to stop pounding this country or face new sanctions. But a decision the American president took to pause the sharing of weapons and intelligence with Kyiv has made Ukraine a softer target. Hear the aftermath of another deadly strike earlier in the week. A missile hit this hotel in the city of Kryvyi Rih. Ilona was on duty at the restaurant.
People were shouting for help from the hotel. It was terrifying. People were just lying in the road. It's heartbreaking to see it all like this. My soul hurts. There's no other way to put it.
Scenes like this are a reminder of the terror ordinary Ukrainians have had to live under since Russia launched its full-scale war. In that time, Ukraine, with the help of allies, has built up a significant capability to shoot down Russian drones and missiles, though, of course, some do get through. But the reality is that Donald Trump's decision to halt military support and intelligence sharing means Ukraine's ability to defend its skies has just got a whole lot harder.
The same is true for Ukrainian troops battling to defend their land. This is a US-supplied Bradley fighting vehicle, hidden away when not in use. Soldiers say its armour and gun boost their ability to storm Russian positions and survive. But the vehicles rely on a steady supply of American ammunition and spare parts.
It would be very sad if the supply of weapons stops. Personally, I think, although I'm not a politician, it's a betrayal for us, for the guys who are defending Ukraine. The latest news cuts my heart. I can answer you that way. It cuts my heart.
Everyone here hopes for a change of heart from Washington. But the threat from Russia is now, so these soldiers say they'll keep using their American kit for as long as it works, and then fight without, if they have to. Deborah Hames, Sky News, Eastern Ukraine.
Nigel Farage has called for his party members to behave responsibly after a very public row intensified today. The Reform leader has reported one of his MPs, Rupert Lowe, to police over allegations of physical violence, which he has denied. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, Mr Farage said that the last general election had shown that the public doesn't like political parties that engage in constant infighting. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, reports.
Only months after celebrating victory together after election as MPs last July, Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe are locked in a bitter personal feud. As a result, Reform UK, which polled more than 4 million votes at the general election and has edged ahead of Labour in recent opinion polls, is now facing a civil war. Escalating their furious war of words, both men have written articles in the Sunday Telegraph attacking each other. Mr Farage accuses Mr Lowe of outbursts using inappropriate language. Mr Lowe alleges a witch hunt and claims Reform's progress is at risk from infighting. The renewed hostilities come after Mr Lowe was accused of bullying female staff and reported to police over claims he threatened Reform UK's party chairman, Zia Yusuf. The great Yarmouth MP says the accusations are lies. The row exploded after a newspaper interview in which Mr Lowe, a millionaire businessman, accused Mr Farage of a messianic style and said he wasn't sure if he could deliver the goods.
I'm not surprised that this has happened generally. I'm only a 3-month-old Reform member, still getting to know the party, but I learned very quickly from lots of people about the tension between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. And Nigel Farage does not like internal dissent.
Back in January, Reform UK's US cheerleader Elon Musk criticised Mr Farage and appeared to endorse Mr Lowe. Supporters of Mr Lowe says he's the victim of a kangaroo court process.
I don't buy for a second that there's any veracity whatsoever to the allegations made against Rupert. The whole thing is trumped up in order to discredit Rupert because the issue had come to a head over Rupert's complaints about the way the party was being governed.
Yet only a few weeks ago, Mr Lowe and Mr Farage appeared together at a rally in Kemi Badenoch's North West Essex constituency, which is a top target seat for Reform UK, and where this weekend voters are split.
I think the nature of reform is fairly obvious to everybody else. In my view, racist.
It's probably a scam because everybody has to be targeted and anti-establishment.
I think there's some internal squabbles at the moment, but I still think they're on good track.
Here at Westminster, the feuding in Reform UK will delight the party's political opponents, with the local elections less than 2 months away. But Reform insiders insist it's far too early to say whether it'll have lasting damage. But for now, Mr Farage appears to be moving ahead without Mr Lowe. John Craig, Sky News.
And John joins me now live from Westminster. Well, John, we know that Rupert Lowe wants to take Nigel Farage to dinner to sort it all out. What have we heard from the pair this evening?
Well, there's no response to that invitation from the Reform UK leader. Instead, the war of words between them is getting more and more intemperate, really, and heated and angry. They're both writing in the Sunday Telegraph, and Mr Farage has set out quite a few details about why he's taken the action he has. He's talked about too many outbursts from Mr Lowe, often using inappropriate language. He talks about a clash that Mr Lowe had with the junior Transport Minister Mike Cain at the end of a debate just before Christmas. It was all about a cargo ship with toxic cargo in his Great Yarmouth constituency. Mr Lowe didn't like the answers, and according to Mr Farage, there was a confrontation. The Sergeant-at-Arms was called, and according to Mr Cain, Mr Farage said his anger showed a man not in charge of his own faculties. Talking about the outbursts, Mr Farage says that Mr Lowe is not the same man that he was in 2019 when they were both in the European Parliament. He didn't show all that anger back then. Well, Mr Lowe has hit back, talking about a witch hunt and also talking about a vicious charade against him. He said he's going to consult his legal team. He says that he's been frozen out. Mr Farage says Mr Lowe's fallen out with all his colleagues, 5 Reform MPs up until now, 4 now. Also, there is that dinner invitation, but they're both agreed about infighting being damaging. Mr Lowe says in his article that talks about Reform UK rising in the polls in recent months, then he says, infighting failed the Tories and it's failing reform. Well, they agree about infighting, but they're not stopping the infighting. If anything, it's getting more and more heated and bitter.
John, thank you. More than 1,000 people have been killed in Syria after 2 days of clashes between the security forces and loyalists of ousted Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. It marks a major escalation in the challenge to the new government in Damascus, 3 months after insurgents took control after removing Assad from power.
There was a lot of hope that, in fact, this would usher in a new chapter in Syria where potentially you could have stability and inclusive governance. I think what we're seeing is that those hopes may have been premature. It's really quite urgent that the United States and Europe come together and try to come up with a plan to address the instability there and help lead to a more stable and peaceful chapter in Syria while the opportunity still exists to do so.
The Israeli Prime Minister's office have announced they will send a delegation to Doha on Monday to advance peace negotiations in their war with Hamas. There have been growing concerns that Gaza's fragile ceasefire deal could collapse after the 6-week first phase expired on the 1st of March. South Korea's impeached president has been released from prison a day after his arrest was cancelled so that he could stand trial for rebellion without being detained. Yoon faces the charges with relation to his declaration of martial law on the 3rd of December, setting off the country's most serious political crisis since its democratisation in the late 1980s. The Vatican has given another update on the health of Pope Francis this evening, saying he's showing a good response to his treatment in hospital for double pneumonia and is making a gradual improvement in his overall condition. He was admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital on the 14th of February with a severe respiratory infection. And the King will refer to uncertain times facing the world in his message for Commonwealth Day, while celebrating the source of strength he believes the Commonwealth remains to this day. Writing to mark the day on Monday, the King will say, in these uncertain times where it is all too easy to believe that our differences are problems instead of a source of strength and an opportunity for learning, the Commonwealth's remarkable collection of nations and peoples come together in the spirit of support and, crucially, friendship. This weekend marks the 5th anniversary of the moment the then Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, warned that COVID-19 could not be contained. Tomorrow, events will be held across the country, including a procession along the National COVID Memorial Wall, followed by a ceremony and a minute's silence at Lambeth Bridge. Our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, revisited one man he met during the pandemic to understand its lasting impact.
The first 24 hours was critical, and I was unconscious, really, in many ways.
I first met Mark when he was fighting for his life. He was in the intensive care unit at Warrington Hospital back in October 2020. It was when a second wave of COVID had started to take hold of the country.
So, to be honest with me, it's still early days.
you worried about the next few days?
I'm worried, yes, but I feel safe, if that makes sense.
5 years on, and Mark is a relieved man. Others on his ward that day didn't go home.
I have been told I've got scarring on my lungs, but it's not affecting the functionality. Whether it will later on in life, I don't know. So at the moment, it's still a process, but I'm a lot better than I was certainly 5 years ago. And it affects you in different ways. I mean, I had, when I was in hospital and after, I had a lot of muscular pain, so for about 18 months I probably couldn't even put a shirt on properly.
This weekend marks 5 years since Prime Minister Boris Johnson told the public it was unlikely COVID could be contained.
There's no question that this is going to become a significant, a much more significant outbreak than it currently is. That's obvious to everyone.
2 weeks later, and the country locked down in an effort to stop the health service from being overrun and to stop more people from dying. Every single one of these hearts represents a loved one, a life lost to one of the deadliest pandemics this century. Some 200,000 people in the UK died with COVID, and the NHS is still struggling to deal with its long-term impacts. We have a growing mental health crisis, the waiting lists, and an aging population with complex health needs being cared for by a worn-out workforce. And those who helped inform government decision through the pandemic say opportunities to limit COVID's impact were missed.
I wish we had acted a little quicker in the first lockdown. I think that would have saved lives in that first wave. And I also think once we'd got the incidence low in the summer of 2020, we should have tried to keep it that way.
Are we beginning to understand long-term health impacts of the pandemic?
COVID is still with us, and it will be with us forevermore. It's a disease we didn't have 5 years ago, and that's what happens with pandemics. When they come in, they cause a huge wave of infection. That's the acute phase that everybody thinks of in terms of a pandemic, but then they become established.
They saved your life.
Oh, totally, yeah. I think I'd have gone on a ventilator, would be here. I don't know.
Mark knows that he'll live with the long-term health complications from COVID for the rest of his life. But he's thankful every single day for that opportunity. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
A massive rubbish dump on the outskirts of Delhi is having a devastating effect on the lives of millions of people living in its shadow. Successive governments have failed to deal with the growing problem of the Indian capital's garbage mountain, and it's those living in close proximity whose health is suffering the most. Sky's Neville Lazarus reports.
They are called super emitters of methane and deadly toxins on land, water and air. Garbage dumps like this not only threaten the lives of millions of people, but also pose a deadly consequence on the environment and climate. Satellite data reveals this site as a global hotspot for potent greenhouse gases. I'm almost at the top of one of the largest landfills in the country. This is called the Garbage Mountain of Delhi, a monstrosity, an eyesore. But more than that, it is a source of death, decay, disease and pollution for hundreds of thousands of people living in its shadows. Feasted upon by birds, flies, vermin and cattle, this trash mountain is more than 200 feet high and covers an area of 70 acres. That's over 50 football pitches. Often, the 20-story slopes of waste catches fire in toxic blazes that last for days during the summer season, or sometimes collapses, crushing people. Dr. Arshad Khan has been practicing for 14 years in the adjacent Mullah colony. Over the years, he's seen a rise in the numbers that visit him.
It's slow poison for the people living here. It's entering their bodies through the air and weakening their immunity. And medicines are not as effective as they should be.
Parveen Khatum finds it difficult to breathe. and her body breaks out in boils and blisters.
It's worse when I lie down. I have difficulty breathing and feel very anxious, and my arms and my legs hurt.
A few months ago, Ansarul Khan was diagnosed with 4th-stage cancer of the lungs and liver. A father of 5, the doctors have given him a few weeks or months to live.
There is so much disease because of this garbage. Sometimes it's so difficult to just breathe. It's frightening.
Fluids drain into the earth, contaminating ground and surface water, and the air is forever polluted. The true menace of this reservoir of sickness and death is largely invisible, and it's the citizens that pay the highest price for government apathy, corruption and inaction. Neville Lazarus, Sky News, Delhi.
Let's catch up on all the very latest sports news now with Dave.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
When he came back to Tottenham as an Arsenal player, the crowd were unbelievably abusive towards him.
It was very intense. You could cut the atmosphere. You could just feel it was different.
Sol Campbell comes out to face the music, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that this North London derby revolved around just one man.
Back then, there was no support. People were just allowed to just carry on in a disgraceful way.
Sol is a sensitive human being, so obviously he felt it, but he didn't show it.
Obviously he's a great player, and obviously all the managers were desperate to keep him on the books.
The world was his oyster.
He was become one of the best players that Spurs had ever had in that position. Fans absolutely adored him.
Campbell's star is still very much in the ascendancy. At international level, he returned from the World Cup with a greatly enhanced reputation. He's a player in demand, though he says for the moment he's staying put.
I'm a Tottenham man, and I'm ready to play for Tottenham. You know, I've been here for a long time, and the fans have been brilliant to me. And you know, what else can I ask for?
No player likes to have any form of distraction, no matter how minute it is. He's the type of person, he just likes to have things clear, crystal clear. That's what he's done. He's telling the fans at Spurs that he's not going anywhere.
It seemed to be a big question, when will Sol Campbell sign a new contract? Spurs fans were starting to worry about it. The media was certainly wondering about it and where it was going. From what we heard behind the scenes, Sol was unhappy at some of the things that were happening at Spurs. There'd been a series of managers. He hadn't always seen eye to eye with those managers. There'd been an incident at Derby County where he'd been accused of breaking a steward's arm, and it wasn't Sol. It was another player had been involved in a fracas, but I don't think Sol felt he was properly supported by Spurs. And I think the signs were there.
Bosman was a somewhat obscure Belgian player who fought the rules that a player at the end of his contract could leave with no fee attached. So there was all sorts of changes going on in football regarding players who were able to move without compensation to the clubs. And Sol took advantage of that.
When did you know that he wasn't going to sign?
I knew, but George Graham and David Pleat would say to me, Chairman, this is just a game they're playing. It's a game. We've been in this business for a long, long time, Chairman. It's a game. He will be signing, trust me, he will be signing. And I'm saying to these two very experienced people in the football world, you do not understand this Bosman ruling, do you? You don't understand it, that he can go free when his contract is up.
George Graham was the manager, I was the director of football, and I remember the first meeting we had at
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by journalist and author Christina Patterson and political and PR consultant Leon Emirali. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of The Observer, its headline, Britain's amongst hardest hit by COVID fallout, 5 years on. Do stay with us. We'll be right back.
You are on Sky News. Welcome to the BAFTAs.
I'm Katie Spencer, Sky's arts and entertainment correspondent, and from the BAFTAs to the Brit Awards, the Oscars to the Olivier's, our entertainment team is here interviewing some of the biggest stars in the world.
It just made more sense that 90% of our cast were formerly incarcerated men.
I'm used to playing characters that are a little bit able.
We're having a children's laureate off, this is great.
Two laureates for the price of one.
Are you feeling well? I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it's happened.
There's this illusion of power.
I feel like I should say namaste, Brad Pitt. Your
Namaste.
character, Brad Pitt, is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that?
Sky News.
Congratulations.
Hello.
Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited,
How are
Tom
you?
Cruise. This is the story of the night. It's the little independent film that could.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
Well, some of the answers we get can be rather unexpected. We aren't afraid to ask the trickier questions others might shy away from.
You okay, guys? You're not getting cold out there? Mr. Wallace, do you regret the inappropriate comments?
Never did I myself reach the point of striking Miss Heard in any way.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news.
Opening night of the UK leg of Taylor Swift's £1 billion grossing tour.
I love you, ain't that the worst thing you ever heard? Such is the spending power of Swifties that her 15 UK shows are projected to boost the economy, thank you very much, by almost £1 billion.
You swear, Taylor, we love you, Taylor!
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Christina Patterson and political and PR consultant Leon Emirali. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, 5 years on since the first lockdown, The Observer reports Britons are amongst the hardest hit by the COVID fallout. On the front of the Mirror, an exclusive report that says Labour is about to crack down on antisocial behaviour, with jobs facing jail time and bans from city centres under new laws set to be announced this week. There are claims a Russian spy master plotted to use mercenaries to control migration into Europe. That's on the front of the Telegraph. The Times leads on an investigation that has found that defence companies supplying weapons for the British military are being attacked and sabotaged by pro-Palestine activists. The group Palestine Action has claimed responsibility for 356 direct actions since 2020. The Sunday Express has an exclusive investigation that claims taxpayers shelled out £6.6 billion on asylum seeker and refugee support schemes. On the front of the Sun, Oasis frontman Liam Gallagher is embroiled in a new court battle with the mother of his love child, who is claiming child support from the star. Brits are apparently buying telescopes at a rapid rate as interest in other planets and aliens soars. That's on the front of the surprise of the star. I was thinking, is that a surprise story in the Star? Anyway, we are joined tonight by journalist and author Christina Patterson and political and PR consultant Leon Emirali. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the front page of the Telegraph and the reform story, the political story that reform seems to be imploding, infighting, not exactly the look they were going for. Christina.
Well, it's not too much of a surprise that two gargantuan egos have clashed. And these are men who love attention. One of them is extremely famous and very big on TikTok and big, has been a big sort of reality TV star, Nigel Farage. Rupert Lowe, not so much, though he clearly puts himself in that category. And yeah, so there have been clashes between them because Rupert Lowe criticised Farage for his leadership style and talked about Reform in an interview this week as being the party of protest with a messiah, which I think is not an inaccurate description of Reform, actually. I think it is a party of protest, and I think Nigel Farage is a kind of messianic figure without anything much in the way of policies. He's charismatic. He's very good at channeling people's anger and discomfort, and he's turned that into a brand. And
would you say it's still a party of protest with 5 MPs? Well, actually 4 now without Rupert Lowe.
Yes, well, I think it's a party of protest rather than policies. I mean, clearly it has got 4 MPs now, as you say, and it has increased its membership a lot. But I think what it doesn't have is a coherent programme for government, and that's the hallmark of populist movements, that they are generally about protest. They're about dissatisfaction, but they're not really about solutions. And in this case, what's happened is that Farage has therefore gone public with the fact that Rupert Lowe has been accused of bullying members of staff and has also threatened violence against Reform's chair. So it's all gone very ugly, and has referred Rupert Lowe to the police.
Rupert Lowe, meanwhile, saying that it's completely baseless and, in fact, lies have been used against him, denying everything.
Well, I mean, he would do, I guess, and the allegations are serious, so let's hope that investigation happens and it takes its course. But Rupert Lowe, as Christina alluded to, is not this household figure, but online, on Twitter in particular, on X, he is hugely popular. I think he's a fan, or Elon Musk is a fan of his, and I do think that Rupert Lowe's tweets get sort of boosted in the algorithm, as it were, by Elon Musk. So, he pops up in my feed a lot of the time as well. And I do think that perhaps Nigel Farage is slightly concerned about the role that Rupert Lowe might play and the popularity he does have with that online component of Reform's support. I don't think that necessarily translates into the real world offline, and I think that's what Farage is very good at as a politician. Like him or loathe him, he does have a sense of where the British public are at, and I think what he's trying to do is shore up his own position. But you're right, ego is at the heart of this, and I think what the best thing could have happened for Reform is it was Nigel Farage elected and 4 nobodies, people who've never heard of before, yes men and women who wouldn't have said boo to a goose and certainly wouldn't have said boo to Nigel Farage. And I think now we are starting starting to see it explode in his face. And I think it isn't much of a surprise to people who've been looking in. It is a surprise, perhaps, that it's taken such a short period of time for them to implode.
OK, let's move on to another story also on the front page of The Telegraph, and this is following on from the Russian spy ring, the sentencing we saw last week. This is the plot to use the migration of immigrants as a weapon of war, a tool against Europe, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's a horrible story, and what we've been seeing, you know, Trump's support for Putin, the more we hear about what Putin is doing covertly in Europe and all over the shop, but particularly in Europe, the more disgusting it is. And to use some of the most desperate people in the world as a weapon of war, which is essentially what the plan has been, Jan Marsalek, who was the boss of Wirecard, which was Germany's equivalent of PayPal. The company was discredited. He has escaped on a private jet, and he's now a fugitive. But he apparently had a private army, not unlike the Wagner Group. He had a private jet. He had all kinds of influence, and his plan was to be controlling migration from Libya, which is a place where many migrants start their journey, or start the African part of their journey to Europe, and cause massive disruption. And as we know, I mean, Nigel Farage himself channeled the migrant issue, and in particular the issue in Germany, to get to the result of Brexit that he wanted. And it is, the horrible truth is that migration is a weapon of disruption, and it's being used by Putin to provide instability. And his great hope is to destabilise Europe. He's done a fantastic job in America. He's got Trump captive, which is already having catastrophic effects in Ukraine, which could well ripple much further across Europe. So it's very, very worrying.
Leon, the thought is to use migration as an issue in elections. It's something that people feel very strongly about, and if you can skewer that, then you can really throw elections and have an influence on them. That's the thinking behind it.
Well, it's a tool of division, isn't it? And that is Russia's strategic aim, is to divide the West. Migration is one of those divisive issues. We're seeing it in elections throughout Europe, in the US as well. So there's no doubt that is having a great deal of success in Russia's sense. And I think we see it in so many different spheres that Russia are seeking to seed division. They are seeking to break up NATO, to break up the European Union, to break up the alliance between the US and Europe. And they seem to be making a pretty good job of it. And I think it's time for the West to wake up to that, to understand what Russia are doing, to understand it is a nefarious actor at play here, and to try and wise up to it and not let it sow that division. But ultimately, migration is a divisive political issue, and Russia know that.
Christina, take us to The Observer, 5 years on since COVID, and analysis that's been interpreted by The Observer suggesting that Britons are amongst the hardest hit by the COVID fallout, performed worse than most other developed nations in response to the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, this is a sad story, but one I'm not very surprised by, because it's already been clear that on the health front, that for whatever complicated reasons, the after effects of COVID in the British population in terms of employment, people who've been on benefits, who are now on benefits, is significantly higher than in any other European country. And it's, we all remember the clapping the NHS and Boris Johnson claiming, enormous victories on every front, even while he was holding his secret lockdown parties. But it's very sad, because we spent more, apparently, on looking after people during COVID, but we've had fewer people go back to work. And if those people who are now on sickness benefits were in the workforce, then obviously that would go some way to solving our economic problems as a country, because, clearly we do have you know, this black hole that Labour keep alluding to, which is not fictional. And it's clearly also, it's much, much better for people, particularly young people, to get into the workforce and have a functional life and a sense of purpose. And I think it's incredibly sad that we have essentially parked so many people on benefits instead of tackling the root causes, helping to address people's anxiety and supporting them into employment.
The article suggesting that we haven't seen the bounce back that the other countries have. So as well as, you know, performing really badly post-COVID, we just haven't seen those results.
Yeah, we haven't. And, you know, I think there's probably a zoom out here to look at as well, which is Brexit was also impacting the UK during that period. So there's the economic impact of that perhaps was hidden by COVID initially, and now we're seeing the economic impact of that. But I think that actually Britain's response, it says there that we spent the most despite higher spending, and that's part of the reason I think, well, we struggled to bounce back in economic terms certainly, but also in those other terms, because we drove inflation by putting thousands of pounds and hundreds of pounds in people's pockets when it wasn't needed, perhaps with schemes like furlough and a lot of corruption in terms of businesses taking advantage of it. And I think that fueled inflation, and that's why we struggled to bounce back quite so quickly.
OK, Leon and Christina, thank you both. We're going to take a break. Coming up, we'll be discussing this on the front of the Times. Their headline, King's Fear over Canada and US. Do stay with us. We'll be right back.
It's a Premier League weekend on NBC and Peacock. March 8, top four hopefuls, Aston Villa. Visit Brentford. Oh, wow! Then March 9th, it's a blockbuster battle. Arsenal. That's done it! Just what Arsenal needed. Visit bitter rivals, Manchester United. The Premier League weekend is on NBC and streaming on Peacock.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world.
I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky's security and defence editor. I've covered Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
I'm Stephen Murphy and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent, based here in Dublin. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Los Angeles.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent, based here in Brussels.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent. Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting.
Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back. You are watching the Press Preview. Still with me, journalist and author Christina Patterson and political and PR consultant Leon Emirali. Let's take a look, first of all, in this section at the front of the Times. And we read that the King is worried about the discord between Canada and the United States of America. And this is following on from Donald Trump declaring that Canada should be the 51st state of the United States of America and insisting on referring to Justin Trudeau as a governor. Christina.
Well, I mean, I think they said the King is said to be concerned about the discord between Canada and the United States, which, you know, I think the official word in terms of English literary criticism is litotes, which is incredible understatement. I mean, basically, Trump, who appears to be a maniac, actually, there isn't really any other word for it, has...
That's not fact, by the way.
That
is definitely opinion.
Well, I would say it was fact, but anyway, the awful, tragic thing is, I think this did start off as a joke. I think he made a joke about Canada becoming the 51st state of America, and then it suddenly struck him that this would be a great idea. And people thought he was joking, but Justin Trudeau ended up in tears after his phone call with Trump the other day. Melanie Joly, their very, very impressive foreign secretary, I'm not sure what they call her, but equivalent, has given an interview in today's Times and was talking about it on Wednesday, on Newsnight earlier this week. Trump is absolutely serious, and or he seems to be absolutely serious. He's certainly speaking to Canada's Prime Minister as if he was serious, and members of the government, and his turbulence on the tariff front seems to be designed to break Canada's economy. And now he's talking about moving the borders and taking over the Great Lakes. I mean, it's gone way beyond a joke, if it ever was a joke. So for the King, who not only has to host this maniac at the Buckingham Palace in a desperate bid to save Ukraine from Putin, which tragically doesn't look as if that's going to happen, but let's just hope and pray that it does, now has to, and the King is, of course, also King of Canada, has to be polite to this man who is threatening territories all over the place and essentially, and seems to be in cahoots with Putin, very much in cahoots with Putin, is causing death in Ukraine at the moment by withdrawing intelligence from Ukraine and withdrawing military support. And poor Prince King Charles has to be polite to this man, as does every politician who is trying to conduct diplomacy at the moment. It is a tragedy.
But Leon, obviously the King is taking this very seriously by commenting and passing judgment about his fears re the relationship.
Yeah, and I guess he has to, because this is unprecedented. I mean, Canada and US are traditionally the closest of allies. I do disagree with you, Christina, to some degree. I don't think Trump is that serious about this. I think that, you know, his modus operandi and his priority is to entertain. It is not to govern. And I think once you get that into our sense with Trump, that this is something that keeps him in the news, keeps him of interest, and I think that's what's going on here. Would he take Canada? Yes, I'm sure he would. Is it likely to happen? No, because I mean, you know, how on earth can that happen feasibly without some sort of military intervention, which would just be bonkers? And if that does happen, then yes, he is a maniac entirely. But I don't think Trump's necessarily entirely serious, and I do think the King has a role to play, because we saw how Trump reacted when he got that letter from the Prime Minister inviting him to come and visit the King. And I think the King obviously has influence, and hopefully he'll use that influence to say, listen, just calm it down a little bit with the rhetoric, because it's not helping us.
Yeah, and the King's going to use his Commonwealth Day message to call on all nations to come together in the spirit of support and friendship, hoping that US and Canada listen to that. Other story, just quickly, on the front of the Sunday Times also, this plan to axe failing civil servants. Ministers are going to make it easier to sack bad civil servants.
Yeah, well, I mean, the civil service has grown enormously. It's now more than 500,000. And you know, there are many, many brilliant civil servants, and there are some who aren't quite so good. And overall, I'm sure there are efficiencies to be made. And Pat McFadden, who will be spearheading this, has talked about bringing in much more of a kind of tech startup approach, where not exactly move fast and break things, one hopes, but just being a bit more speedy about things. The civil service famously does act quite slowly, and so I think the idea will be that those civil servants who and you know, people are not, their performance isn't necessarily measured all that rigorously, and I think people who are not performing so well will apparently be offered incentives to leave, and I don't disagree with that.
Well, the civil service has an annual salary bill of 16.6 billion and a workforce, as you say, of over 500,000. We must leave it there for the moment. Christina and Leon, thank you very much. We'll see you at the top of the 11. Let's take a look at the weather for you in the meantime.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, tomorrow will stay mild for most, but it will start to turn colder from the north on Monday, with some wintry showers likely. There'll be a chilly, although largely frost-free start, but it will be fine for most. There'll be just a few fog patches over northern parts and some showery outbreaks for the far north. The morning will stay mostly dry, with plenty of spring sunshine after any early fog lifts, but the Northern Isles will be wet and increasingly windy. It'll be very mild again, but breezy in the south. The far north of mainland Scotland will see showery outbreaks edging in later. Cornwall may catch a few showers too, but most other places look dry and sunny into the evening. Monday will be cloudier than recently, with patchy, mainly light rain, then showers sinking south across Scotland.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the continuing protest at Westminster as the man who climbed up the clock tower which houses Big Ben shows no sign of coming down.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.